Susan Caldwell had watched the lighthouse from her office window every morning for 2 years, and every morning it made her blood pressure spike. This week, she decided to end the inconvenience permanently. She hired a crew to pour industrial cement into the tower doorway. By the time Robert Reynolds pulled into his driveway, the masons had already filled the entrance with wet concrete.
Susan, what the hell have you done?
I'm protecting aesthetic standards. That lighthouse has been an eyesore long enough.
You just cemented an active Coast Guard aid. The beacon is federally protected. They'll be here in 2 days.
Coast Guard? Don't be ridiculous. That tower hasn't been used in decades.
He didn't argue. He just looked at the brass seal she never noticed.
Susan's laugh cut the salt air, but the cement was drying, and federal law doesn't bend for HOA bylaws. Robert opened his phone to the Coast Guard contact. Some mistakes don't get a warning letter. Back at his cottage, Robert found the Coast Guard maintenance notice already waiting on his kitchen table among the usual HOA complaints. The letter was blunt. Scheduled maintenance on all active aids to navigation must be completed within 48 hours. Failure to provide access constitutes a federal violation. 48 hours. That meant the Coast Guard would be at his door by Thursday, and the lighthouse door was solid concrete. He grabbed his phone and called Susan. Straight to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He grabbed the notice and his keys and drove past the Shoreline Estates entrance with the letter on the passenger seat. 15 minutes later, he pulled up to her waterfront mansion.
You need to read this, Susan. It's from the Coast Guard.
I don't care if it's from the president. The HOA has final say over all structures.
You're not hearing me. In 48 hours, federal officers are going to find that door sealed.
Susan's response was a jagged laugh and a threat about her attorney. Robert had stopped listening. He turned back to his truck, knowing the woman was a brick wall with legal bills. The countdown had begun. 2 days later, the black Coast Guard SUV pulled up to the lighthouse right on schedule. LT Commander Mark Jensen stepped out and froze at the sight of fresh concrete sealing the tower door. He ordered his men to photograph everything, then called Robert Reynolds directly. Robert arrived less than 10 minutes later. He'd been expecting this.
The door was cemented on Susan Caldwell's order. She's the HOA architectural chair.
The HOA chair? She just declared war on the United States Coast Guard.
Jensen told Robert to get Susan down there. She arrived in her hot pink jacket, feigning confusion.
This is a mistake. I just wanted to improve the neighborhood's look.
This tower is marked with a U.S. Coast Guard seal. Did you not see it?
Susan's face drained white. Her legal ground had just vanished. Jensen ordered the cement removed immediately. A crew with jackhammers arrived, but the concrete had set hard.
The ventilation grills are blocked too. If that beacon overheats, we lose the light.
A storm warning had been issued for that night. The Coast Guard knew they were out of time. By sunset, the beacon began to flicker. Steam poured from the blocked vents.
Robert watched from his window. He'd seen that light steady for 40 years.
The light stuttered, then went dark. 30 miles out, a fishing boat lost its guide. A frantic voice crackled over the radio. "Mayday, Mayday. We're taking on water. Need immediate assistance."
That's the sea venture. Without the beacon, they're blind out there.
The rescue boat launched into the storm, but the missing lighthouse meant navigation was a nightmare. Inside the lighthouse, the beacon stayed dead. The fisherman's only hope was fading fast. The sea venture pitched in the black swell. The crew fought to keep her afloat, but without the lighthouse beam, they were directionless. A broken radio transmission. 2 men gone. Wave took them. God help us. The Coast Guard rescue boat reached the coordinates 20 minutes later. Only 2 survivors remained aboard. Searchlights swept the water, but the storm had already swallowed the other 2 men. By dawn, the rescue was over. 2 families would wait at the dock for men who would never return.
This was no accident. The blocked ventilation caused the beacon to fail. Those men died because someone sealed that door.
Robert Reynolds received the news at his cottage. The badge of the Coast Guard was never something he wanted to see at his door.
2 men dead, and Susan thought it was about aesthetics.
The lighthouse stood silent against the gray horizon. Its dead beam was now a monument to a crime that should never have happened. The Coast Guard opened a formal investigation. Every tool left at the scene, every chip of concrete, became federal evidence. The Coast Guard Investigative Service arrived before noon. Agents photographed every inch of the sealed door and collected samples of the concrete.
The ventilation failure is undisputed. The question is, who ordered it?
Robert answered every question. He produced the maintenance schedule, his call logs, and the letter he had shown Susan.
She knew the tower was active. I gave her every opportunity to undo it.
Susan was summoned to the Coast Guard station. Her first words were a demand for her attorney. But the Mason foreman's statement shattered her defense. She had pointed directly at the door and said, "Fill it." With that testimony, the case shifted from property dispute to federal felony. Susan was formally arrested, maritime sabotage, and 2 counts of negligent homicide.
2 men dead, and all she could think about was her view.
The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The hot pink jacket didn't seem so fashionable now. At the federal prosecutor's office, Robert Reynolds laid out a century of family documents. He didn't need a lawyer for this part.
My great-grandfather, Elias Reynolds, built that lighthouse in 1882 for the U.S. Lighthouse Board.
He showed the original construction contract and something much more powerful, a perpetual easement deed. That deed granted the federal government permanent access, but it also bound the property to the Reynolds family in perpetuity.
This makes the tower an active federal aid, no question. Susan's defense just evaporated.
The assistant U.S. attorney, a woman who had prosecuted 3 maritime cases, stared at the document like it was a Christmas gift. The perpetual easement meant the lighthouse was legally untouchable by any HOA, local ordinance, or private developer.
Susan was told this a dozen times. She chose to ignore it.
Across town, her defense attorney read the same document and put his head in his hands. The case against Susan Caldwell wasn't just about negligence anymore. It was about willful, documented defiance of federal law. The U.S. Attorney's Office made the indictment official. 1 count of maritime sabotage, 2 counts of negligent homicide causing death.
This is a witch hunt. I never intended to hurt anyone. The HOA approved my plan.
The judge set bail at $1 million. Susan posted it with a second mortgage on her house. The noose was tightening. That weekend, Susan called an emergency HOA meeting. She expected support. She got a firing squad. A resident jabbed a finger in her face.
People here used to thank me for protecting property values. Now you're treating me like a criminal.
The HOA board formally censured her and voted to remove her as architectural chair. She stormed out. Her attorney petitioned the U.S. attorney for a plea deal. 5 years, no trial.
The Coast Guard sends one message: no deals for people who kill sailors. She faces the full weight of the law.
Susan learned of the rejection at her mansion. She stared at the lighthouse through her window, the view she had hated now promising her ruin. While preparing for trial, Robert dug out the old sea chest his grandfather had left him. It smelled of salt and old paper. Beneath the lighthouse blueprints, he found a leather-bound survey map dated 1879, far larger than he remembered. He unrolled it on his kitchen table. The boundaries didn't stop at the lighthouse rocks.
The OA's development, Susan's mansion, the marina, all of it sat on Reynolds' land.
He grabbed the deed, the 1879 patent signed by President Hayes, and compared it to modern property records. Every lot in Shoreline Estates, all 96 homes, were built on land his family had never sold.
For 140 years, the Reynolds family had held title without anyone realizing the true extent.
Robert sat back in his chair, the weight of the discovery pressing on him.
This wasn't just about the lighthouse. He could evict the entire HOA if he chose.
But he folded the map and locked it away. The trial came first. After that, the storm would break. The trial of United States versus Susan Caldwell convened under fluorescent light. The gallery was full of fishermen's families. A sketch artist in the front row drew Susan's rigid profile. The hot pink jacket was gone, replaced by a severe navy suit. Robert Reynolds sat at the prosecution table, his hands folded. He would be their first witness. He walked to the stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and stated his name for the record. His voice was steady.
I'm the fourth-generation keeper of that lighthouse. It's been an active federal aid to navigation since 1882.
LT. Commander Jensen sat rigidly in the second row. His dress uniform was a silent indictment.
Susan Caldwell sent 47 letters demanding I remove the tower. She said it messed up her view and that the HOA would back her.
The prosecutor walked him through every warning he had given, every ignored letter. The jury leaned forward.
She cemented her own fate. She just doesn't know it yet.
Robert stepped down, his expression unreadable. The land deed stayed locked away, its moment not yet come. The prosecution called its Coast Guard expert, Lieutenant Commander Mark Jensen. He walked to the stand like a man carrying dead sailors on his shoulders.
The ventilation grills are not optional. Without them, the lamp fails. We found every vent completely sealed.
He described the overheat sequence. Then the prosecutor clicked a remote, and a photograph filled the screen. 2 faces from a fishing license. The Sea Venture's lost crew. The courtroom went dead silent. A woman in the second row crumpled. She grabbed her daughter's hand, and the judge let it be. Susan Caldwell's face went slack. For the first time, she looked at the families instead of the jury.
The defendant wasn't protecting a view. She killed 2 men over property values.
The gallery erupted in sobs and muffled curses. The bailiff stiffened, and the gavels slammed. Susan's attorney scribbled a note, but his hand shook. There was no legal strategy left for this. The evidence bags on the prosecution table told the whole story. Concrete, photographs, and a dead beam. The closing arguments were brief. The defense's only hope was a technical mistake, but the jury had already seen the dead. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. In a federal case, that's a verdict with no doubt. When they filed back in, the foreman's face told the story before he spoke. We, the jury, find the defendant, Susan Caldwell, guilty of maritime sabotage and 2 counts of negligent homicide. Her legs buckled. She didn't scream, she just folded.
He had waited for this moment, but it brought no satisfaction, only sorrow for the lost.
The families of the fishermen wept openly. Justice, cold and formal, had arrived.
The system works. Slowly, but it works.
The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks. Susan would remain in custody. Robert walked out into the sun. The land deed was still in his chest. Its time was coming. 6 weeks later, the sentencing hearing convened under the same fluorescent lights. Susan Caldwell stood in an orange jumpsuit, her defiance finally broken. The judge's voice carried no anger, only finality. For the reckless disregard of federal law causing 2 deaths, this court sentences you to 180 months in federal prison. Susan's mouth opened, but no sound came. The marshals moved in, and her hands were cuffed behind her back.
My house. Please, someone take care of my house.
Robert had no interest in her house. That afternoon, he filed a civil lawsuit with the county recorder, the historic land patent signed by President Hayes.
Elias Reynolds didn't build just a lighthouse. He secured a coastline. Now, it's coming back to the family.
The next morning, a legal notice appeared on the Shoreline Estates sign, property claim filed, all lots subject to ownership dispute. Residents gathered, phones out, reading that their homes sat on land they never legally owned. Panic spread through the cul-de-sacs. The HOA president called an emergency meeting, but everyone knew Susan had lit the match that would burn their neighborhood down. In his cottage, Robert watched the sun set behind the lighthouse. The first battle was over. The real war was about to begin. The civil hearing in County Superior Court drew every Shoreline Estates resident. Robert Reynolds sat alone, the old leather folder on the table before him.
Your Honor, this is the 1879 land patent signed by President Hayes. It conveys the entire coastline from the lighthouse to the eastern marsh.
He unrolled the survey map. The red boundary line encircled every lot, every house, every street in Shoreline Estates. A title expert testified. The Reynolds patent had never been subdivided. The developer of the HOA had bought worthless paper. The HOA's attorney tried to argue abandonment, but Robert produced 140 years of tax receipts. The courtroom went still. The judge's gavel fell. This court recognizes the Reynolds patent as the governing instrument. The plaintiff is the legal owner of the shore.
140 years of Reynolds' claim, held in a dusty chest. Now it was truth in a court of law.
Across the aisle, the HOA president buried his face in his hands. The residents in the gallery stared at the man who owned their homes. The judge ordered a full survey of the development. The HOA's legal existence now hung by a thread. Robert's lawyer leaned in. "What do you want from them?" Robert looked at the families, then at the deed, and did not answer. That week, process servers delivered identical envelopes to all 96 Shoreline Estates homes. Each contained a ground lease offer and a stark choice.
I'm not here to evict anyone. Sign a 99-year lease for $1 a month, and your home is safe.
Murmurs erupted. A woman near the front clutched her chest. "You could take everything, and you're asking for $1?"
This land belonged to my family before there was a town, before there was an HOA. I'm not taking anyone's home.
An HOA board member rose from his seat, face red. Robert held up the framed photograph of his great-grandfather. Elias Reynolds built the lighthouse that killed 2 men because of Susan's spite. This is my answer to that.
He could feel the hostility breaking. Not victory, something quieter.
By the end of the meeting, 67 families had signed. The rest wavered, but the tide had turned. The old HOA board formally dissolved a week later. Susan's legacy was now a footnote in the county's property records. That evening, Robert closed the leather folder on his kitchen table. Outside, the lighthouse beams swept the dark water. Steady, unbroken. The following Monday, Robert Reynolds drove to the address he had memorized from 47 complaint letters. Susan Caldwell's waterfront mansion was empty. The bank had foreclosed when her legal fees drained everything. He walked up the marble steps, carrying a single sheet of paper and a staple gun.
20 feet of frontage, an ocean view she'd killed for. Now it's just a vacant lot.
A neighbor across the street watched from a window, phone in hand, but she lowered it. He pressed the notice against the mahogany door. The staple gun cracked once, twice. He didn't smile. He simply looked at the brass numbers by the entrance. The county would auction the house to settle part of Susan's restitution debt to the fishermen's families. He turned and walked back to his truck, the lighthouse beam cutting a clean line through the overcast sky. The eviction notice hung straight on the door of a house nobody would ever call home again. 1 year after Susan's sentencing, the lighthouse stood fully restored. New copper vents, new lamp, and the same old stone. The cemented doorway was gone. A heavy oak door, built from coastal timber, swung freely. A bronze plaque now rested at the tower's base. 2 names engraved beneath a Coast Guard star. On the anniversary, families and Coast Guard officers gathered. The life preserver from the Sea Venture hung beside the plaque.
The light they counted on is back, and it will never go dark again.
Robert stood apart, his yellow slicker traded for a dark jacket. He watched the proceedings in silence.
2 men died because someone forgot what this light means. Never again.
A fisherman's widow placed flowers by the plaque. No one spoke her name. Everyone knew it. Later, Commander Jensen shook Robert's hand. No salute, just a grip that said more than a citation. As the sun set, the lamp ignited. The beams swept out, steady and sure, over the water where they were lost. The federal appeals court upheld Susan's conviction in a terse 1-paragraph order. No hearing, no dissent. Her husband filed for divorce the same week, citing her incarceration as the final breakdown. From prison, Susan mailed Robert a letter. 7 pages of accusations and pleas. He unfolded it, read the first line, then dropped it into the trash.
4 pages blaming the HOA board, 3 blaming me. No mention of the 2 men she killed.
The Coast Guard announced a commendation ceremony for Robert Reynolds, citing his unwavering cooperation. On the station pier, Jensen presented a framed citation for distinguished civil service.
The Coast Guard doesn't forget the people who keep our aids burning.
A reporter yelled a question about Susan's mansion. Robert raised a hand and walked away. He headed toward the lighthouse, his silhouette sharp against the morning sun. The Shoreline Community Association replaced the old HOA within a month. Not a single beige regulation survived the rewrite. At the inaugural meeting, they elected a retired fisherman as president. Robert sat in the back, not on the board.
I'm not joining the board, but if the lighthouse needs a voice, you know where to find me.
A new charter replaced every rule Susan had weaponized. Property values didn't collapse, they stabilized. He granted a public easement along the shore, ensuring the beach stayed open forever. Kids who used to get fined for balls in the street played catch under the lighthouse's shadow. The auction of Susan's mansion covered part of the restitution. Her pension seized the rest. Robert received no profit from the sale. He forwarded the check to the fishermen's families and a local maritime school.
Elias wouldn't have wanted revenge. He wanted a coast that worked.
The lighthouse swept the sea. The town had a soul again. That evening, Robert sat by the fire with the leather journal his grandfather had left. The firelight caught the gilt edges. He opened to a passage dated October 1885, written in Elias Reynolds's careful script. The journal read, "The lamp burns true tonight. I pray it guides the lost. This coast is my life's work, and my children's children will keep the flame."
He looked at the framed photograph of Elias and the lighthouse board, the same man who had written those words.
For 140 years, the Reynolds line had done exactly what Elias asked. He didn't need a newspaper headline or a citation to understand what he had preserved. He closed the journal and placed it beside the deed that had changed everything.
2 men died because someone forgot what this light meant. That will never happen again.
He set the photograph on the mantel beside his grandfather's compass. "Keeper of the light," the inscription read. Outside, the beam swept through the night, steady and silent, as it would for the next 100 years. At dusk, Robert walked the shoreline path. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its beam not yet awake, but soon. He pushed open the heavy oak door and began the climb. The spiral steps were worn by a century of keepers. His boots echoed on the iron. Each landing released another memory of storms, of light, of duty. He reached the lantern room and circled the lamp. The Fresnel lens stood clean, the new vents humming. He flipped the switch. The lamp ignited, and the beam burst through the glass, sweeping the black water. He stepped out onto the narrow gallery. The wind tasted of salt and emptiness, but he wasn't alone. A single fishing boat cruised below. Its running lights traced the beam's path, perfectly aligned. The boat's bow turned toward the harbor, safe behind the beam. Robert's hand relaxed on the railing.
That's why it matters. Not for the view. For them.
He descended the spiral one last time, leaving the tower to its unbroken watch over the coast. As the sun melted into the sea, the lighthouse blade cut the dusk. A fishing boat crossed the beam, small and certain. That light had been built by a man who believed the coast deserved a guardian, and 140 years later, it still had one. Robert Reynolds stood on the beach, not a man seeking attention, just a keeper watching his watch. He turned toward home, the beam stroking his shoulders. He didn't look back. The lamp would outlast him. It would outlast every home in Shoreline. That was the point. Some lights are for decoration. This one was for the lost. The boat rounded the harbor mouth, her running lights blinking twice, an old signal of thanks. The lighthouse answered in its own language, carving the same circle it had since 1882. On the cliff, the brass plaque caught the light. 2 names, a dozen flowers, a debt paid. The beam swept on.